For all the info I've seen out there on this is how you mix a kick in an 808, I can tell you one thing for sure: there's no one answer. So not only is there no one answer in terms of you can accomplish what you're trying to do different ways, but also what worked in one mix or one beat might not work in another mix. Basically, over the last couple years, I've just done a handful of things to get my 808s and kicks to gel together, and really in every beat it ends up I have to do something different to get them to work. Unless you're using the exact same kicks and 808s in the same key, cutting the rest of your instruments at the same frequencies to leave that low end open, you're really gonna have to find a different solution 9 times out of 10 when you're trying to mix a kick and an 808. Before I get into any of the actual process behind the tips and tricks, I want to talk about a few things that are most important, and a few things that if you don't do, these tips and tricks will really be irrelevant because you're losing the battle from the start. So the first thing, without a doubt, is sound selection. 90% of the battle is picking the right sounds to work together, picking the right sounds for your song, and leveling your mix. If you do those things, you have 90% of the work done. There's just a few small other things you can do to make them work great together, but really just off sound selection, your beat's gonna sound pretty good if you get that right. So the next thing, like I kind of just mentioned, would be leveling, getting the levels of your kick and your 808 right so that one's not overpowering the other. Without leveling, these tips are kind of irrelevant. If you have your kick 10 dB too loud, you can compress it and sidechain it all you want, but it's not gonna work. You gotta get your levels right before you move on to anything else. Another thing that might be obvious to some of you, but I see some people forget to do, make sure that the 808 is cutting itself off. If your 808s are overlapping and running into each other, it's automatically going to be muddy. If you just right click on a sample, there's this cut itself option. This is just the quickest way I know in FL Studio. Just make sure that the 808 is cutting itself off. Okay, and then the last thing before we get into the actual tips and tricks is your thought process. I say this because I spent so many years spending way too much time on little things, trying to compress an 808, trying to EQ a kick. Before you do any of that, think about what's bothering your ear. Are the attacks and the transients of the kick and 808 fighting? Do you just need to turn down your kick? Do you need to trim the tail of your 808? Is the 808 so long that it's bothering your ear? Do you need to change the pitch of your 808? Do you need to change the speed of your samples? So I know it's like a lot to think about. What I'm getting at is before you get into processing and you do things for no reason and you just start compressing and you start EQing and you start sidechaining, think about what's bothering you and how to resolve it. It's that simple. So after you do all that, you're sure that you got your sound selection solid, you've leveled it, and you've tried to identify what bothered you. I'm going to get into these tips that can help you resolve that. Tip number 1, trim the tail of your 808. So this first pattern is at 140 BPM. Let's play it real quick. Okay, so it's not bad, but as I paused it and I started thinking, I still heard the 808 ringing out. I think the 808, the tail of it's too long. There's no dynamic to it. Like the 808 doesn't sound like it's decaying before the next 808 hit. So the first thing I'm gonna think about here is trim the tail of the sample, trim the tail of the 808. So to do that, I'm just gonna open this up and you can see the sample really continues to play out over time. It's not super dynamic. If I adjust this out knob, I can trim the tail. That's going to force the 808 to sound like it's decaying and dying off before that next 808 hit. I feel like I can cut it even a little bit more. So that is a lot more bounce to me versus the original. Rather than just having this big tail and it just kind of sounds like it's the same volume the whole time the 808's hitting, you don't even realize it's coming back in. Really, any native sampler for any DAW should be able to do this, whether you're in Logic, Ableton, Cubase, whatever. Okay, so now that we trimmed the tail of the 808, let's see if anything else. I feel like even though the sample's decaying how I like, the low end is really resonant, and I feel like it's just kind of overpowering in the 808. I'm gonna think about EQing it just to cut below 20. You'd be surprised. It's not that audible of a difference, but it really is a difference in feel. 9 times out of 10, I'll end up cutting below 20 dB on my 808s and on my master. Let's turn it off and see. Yeah, it really makes a difference to me just cutting those really low frequencies. So the kick and the 808 are working pretty good together now, but another trick that you can try is to adjust the sample or the speed. Something I really just started doing more recently is adjusting the speed of samples. In FL Studio, you can do this with this, multiplicator. time stretch knob. In other DAWs, there's other ways to do this. I think most native samplers will have something like this where you can adjust the speed of it. You can mess with this time knob too, but I think it's more dramatic than this multiplicator knob. Multiplicator, I feel like I'm saying it wrong, but it says multiplicator. Not only adjusting the pitch, but also the speed of the sample a lot of times can make them fit together. I do this a lot on hats, snares, kicks, 808s, really all drum samples I'm using. I'll stretch a lot, whether making it faster or slower with this multiplicator knob. So that the pitch of the sample doesn't change, I'm gonna put this mode on EQ'd transient, and I'm gonna stretch this multiplicator knob so that the sample's a little bit quicker. It sounds so much better. Listen to this. If we make it faster versus the original, it sounds a world better. So I did a few things with this pattern, but hands down, the number one thing that seems most effective to me right now is just adjusting the speed and making the 808 a little bit quicker. It sounds so much more natural, and it just blends in so much better with the kick. Really, it changes like the tone of it too a lot. So I really like that. Okay, so let's move on to the next pattern. Let's solo the 808 for this pattern. So it's that spins 808. It has a really quick attack to it. It decays pretty quick. Let's bring the kick in. I think what's bothering my ear is that the 808 has a fairly quick attack. It has a fairly quick transient to it. So does the kick, and they both just sound like they're super quick. So I feel like if I slow the kick down, it's gonna sound thicker, and it's gonna sit on top of and mesh with that 808 a lot better. Okay, so I can't lie to you, this multiplicator knob confuses me sometimes. It says that it's 121%. So I would think that it's speeding it up, but you can tell it's actually slowing it down, because if I make it more dramatic, it's clearly making it slower. So slowing the kick down actually sounds better to me. So here's the original. Super punchy, super quick kick. I want it to chill out a little bit and just be a little bit more low end heavy. I want to pitch it down a little bit, and I want it to feel a little bit slower because the 808's already really quick. It sounds 10 times better already. Let's check out this next pattern. That's at 118. I'm gonna listen to just the 808. Okay, so not a very punchy 808. So in my mind, I just did a bad job of sound selection there. Before I waste any time mixing, I'm gonna try to swap out this kick for a punchier kick. So let's check out this kick 4. Sounds a lot better. Before I got into processing that kick or any tip or trick, I just realized that it's a soft 808. It doesn't have a lot of punch to it. Neither does the kick. I'm just gonna find a punchier kick rather than over process this and try to do transient designers or compress it or whatever. I feel like the high end on this kick's bothering me now. Look at that. You can see it has like some noise up here in like the 20K. That's the last thing you need in a kick. You can still leave a lot of high end. I just wanted to cut this. It's just going to become a problem when you add other high end elements like hi-hats and stuff like that. You don't really need your kick fighting that at all. So I'm just cut that out now. So I'm just thinking here, like when I have the 808 turned down a little bit more, everything sounds really good to me. If I want the 808 to be louder though, it starts to fight the kick. So you could try to sidechain them. So to sidechain it, I'm gonna go to the track the kick's on. I'm gonna right click the track that the 808's on and click sidechain to this track. I'm gonna go back to 808. I'm gonna use a fruity limiter. So I'm gonna right click down here and click the kick, turn the knee all the way up. I'm gonna turn the ratio to 5:1. These settings aren't final or fatal. They're not the go-to correct settings. You gotta listen. This is just kind of how I start with the sidechain. I'm gonna turn the threshold down to where the kick's hitting. This is a knob you're really gonna wanna pay attention to, which is the release, meaning, so the 808's ducking the kick. The release knob is just gonna tell you how quick do you want the 808 to come back in after the duck. So that sounds pretty good. It's ducking it nice. Let's check out this last pattern for the last handful of tips you guys can try. So really, I just want like a more aggressive and beefier kick, so I'm going to swap that kick out before I do anything. I'm going to turn the kick up. I feel like the speed of the 808 can come down a little bit, but I don't want the pitch to change, so I'm going to put this on transient. So I adjusted the speed of the 808 to be quicker, actually, versus the original. Probably make a lot more sense to you guys if I had the tempo on. It just sounds like the 808's like a little bit slow and like behind the tempo as it plays out to me, so I'm going to just make the 808 faster. Again, I have this E2 transient on, so the pitch isn't going to change when I stretch this. It sounds so much more in tune with the tempo then. Another tip I don't necessarily need for this pattern, but I want to make sure that I get into this video, is adjusting the attack of the 808. Another option, instead of ducking or side chaining it, is to adjust the actual attack of it using like an ADSR knob. So in FL Studio, I'm going to come here and I'm going to make this a square again so it listens to me. I'm going to turn this attack knob up just a tiny bit. So I'll solo that so you guys can really hear it. So here's like the standard attack of the sample. I'm not messing with anything. You can hear like the pop, like the high end on it. Like you can hear like the transient on the high end. So if I turn this attack knob up just a tiny bit, so yeah, just delaying this attack a tiny bit helps a ton. Another tip, put your 808s and kicks in mono. All you have to do is right here, turn this, and you want it to be 100% merged. So I'm gonna put the kick and the 808 right down the middle. I know I always want the low end of my 808 like fairly down the middle or all the way down the middle, but if the 808 disappears in the mix and it just sounds like it's way not big enough, what I'll do is, even though I put the 808 actual signal in mono, I'll send it to like another track, make this a distortion track, and just keep this like fairly in stereo. Maybe I'll even add some stereo image to the distortion, like the mids and the high end of the 808, specifically just the high end of the 808, and always try to do things in context to your mix. You can make an 808 and kick sound great together, mix them all day, but make sure they work in the context to your mix. And make sure your tracks are EQ'd properly. If you have a piano with a lot of sub frequencies and 50 and 100 and 150 in it, it's gonna clash with your 808 and kick, and it's just filling up space you don't need it to, quite frankly. So I can't say that there's any rule of thumb on like where to cut your tracks at. Do everything in the context to your mix. See what works for you. Sound selection, leveling, EQ your other instruments before any of this. Make sure that stuff's right. So once you make sure you have all that stuff right, you can try to run through a list of some of these tips. Not in any specific order. I really end up trying multiple of these sometimes in a mix. Sometimes I'll use a combination of things to get my 808 and kick to work together. Really just experiment with them, see what works for you, see what works for your song in your specific mix. So like I said, guys, I know this is one of the hardest things to get right, is mixing your low end, getting kicks and 808s to work together in your mixes, but I hope that some of these tips helped you out today. I'm still experimenting with these. I'm always learning new stuff, but it really depends on your song, man. Find what works for you and just experiment. Always try new things. So if you guys enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe, drop a comment, let me know what you want to see next. Whatever gets upvoted, I'll probably try to do pretty soon. Also, shout out Cable Guys for hooking me up with a bunch of software after I did that last video. Definitely more stuff coming on Cable Guys plugins, because it's just a great company and they just make great stuff. So thanks for watching, guys, and peace.